Okay, let's unpack this interesting idea. What if language isn't just, arbitrary sounds we've all agreed on?
Right? What if there's more to it?
Yeah, like what if the actual sounds, the phonemes, somehow encode our physical experience? Things like gravity, direction, how we move in the world.
And here's the kicker.
What if the AI systems we're building, the ones processing all this language, are totally blind to that layer?
That's exactly the question we're digging into today. We've got some really thought-provoking material here centering on this linguistic theory called Odontili.
Odontili, okay.
And it suggests that current AI, especially things like automated content filters, might be fundamentally missing the boat on how language can work.
So our mission for this deep dive, figure out what Odontili actually is, why it's a hurdle for AI language models, and what happens when these systems fail because they don't get this deeper structure.
And the sources provide this perfect, almost strangely poetic example.
The DALE case.
Exactly. OpenAI's DLOE image generator rejecting a prompt that tried to link linguistically and symbolically two things you wouldn't normally connect: a serpent and a traditional leg wrapping.
Sounds intriguing. We need to get into why that specific link makes sense, at least through a certain lens, and why the AI just couldn't see it.
Let's jump right into that incident then, the one laid out in the material. A user asks DLOE for an image.
Okay.
They want two things combined. First, a serpent coiling up the tree of knowledge, classic Garden of Eden imagery.
Got it.
And second, something called a peitova. It's described as a traditional leg wrapping from Turkic cultures, also spirally coiling up a human leg.
Upward motion for both.
Yeah.
But why those two things?
Well, the sources stress this wasn't random or trying to be provocative. The user's intent was scholarly.
Scholarly? How so?
They were exploring a potential parallel based on linguistics and symbolism and wanted a visual representation, sort of a scientific inquiry.
But the AI didn't see it that way.
Nope. Flat rejection. Flagged by OpenAI's content moderation filter.
Why? What was the violation?
It seems the system just defaulted to assuming it was inappropriate, maybe suggestive imagery based on keywords like serpent or maybe the spiral shapes, who knows?
The algorithm just saw patterns it associates with bad stuff.
Pretty much. And yeah, you could just say, oh, filter error, too sensitive. But the sources argue it points to something much more fundamental.
Which is?
That the AI lacks the necessary conceptual frameworks. It can't interpret this kind of visual linguistic content when it's embedded in a specific cultural or, scholarly context. It's missing that whole layer.
So the AI is missing this layer. What is this layer? That brings us to Odontili, right?
Exactly. The material introduces Odontili, OT for short. It's presented as a foundational phonosemantic theory developed by Dr. Mahmudjan Kuchkarov.
Phonosemantic. Okay, break that down. Phonosemantic meaning. So sound and meaning are linked.
That's the absolute core idea. OT basically throws a wrench in traditional linguistics, like Saussure's idea that the link between a word's sound and its meaning is mostly arbitrary.
Like dog doesn't sound like a dog. It's just a label we agreed on.
Right. OT says, hold on, maybe it's not arbitrary at all. It suggests that phonemes, the basic sounds like A, P, aren't just empty symbols.
Okay, so what are they then?
They're encoded reflections of our experience. Physical, emotional, even ecological experience. How we exist in the world.
Oh, so the sound itself carries a trace of, physical reality, gravity, movement.
That's the claim. OTC's language is fundamentally directional, influenced by gravity, deeply embodied. It's all about physical interaction and what the sources call semantic flow.
Which is totally different from how AI usually works, right? They're just looking at stats, how often words appear together.
Precisely. AI models are mostly statistical pattern matchers. They analyze correlations between tokens, these sort of abstract symbols, without grasping this underlying embodied meaning OT talks about.
Okay, let's get specific then. The sources dive into this analysis of A, Y, and pay using Odontili. How does that work?
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating. They start with the phone unit, AY.
AY.
In the OT framework, A represents space, or Macon, as the source puts it, like an open dimension, an open form.
Like English, like an open area. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And Y, that signifies water or fluid motion, something that naturally wants to flow downwards, cling to surfaces. Think gravity.
Water flowing down.
Okay.
So AY together encodes what exactly?
It encodes the image, the concept of water moving down or across a space. It represents spreading out, sticking to things, that natural downward pull.
Like rain on a window pane.
Perfect example. It's a downward sort of yielding passive movement.
Got it. Downward flow, adhesion.
Right.
Now, what happens when you add the P sound to make pay?
Right, so this is where consonants come into play in OT. They aren't just sounds. The theory positions them as semantic
Operators. Like in math.
Kind of. Consonants like P, V, N, K, they act like modifiers. They can negate, limit, or even reverse the meaning embedded in the vowel sound or the base unit. They add constraint, resistance, inversion.
So P is an operator.
Yeah.
And it does what to AY? Does it reverse that downward flow?
That's exactly how the source analyzes it. Pay equals AY plus the P operator.
Okay.
So if AY is water flowing down passively with gravity.
Pay is water doing the opposite, going up.
Yes. Or at least resisting that downward pull. It's a flow that climbs, that spirals upward perhaps, actively defying gravity. It's the inversion of the AY motion triggered by that P.
That's quite something, the idea that a simple sound encodes direction and resistance.
Okay, so connect this back to the DLE image, the serpent and the leg wrapping.
Absolutely. The source is a very direct line. They apply this OT phonosemantic breakdown to Peyton, the serpent, and Peytova, the leg wrapping. And they note these terms have roots that fit this framework.
Okay, Peyton, the serpent. How does OT interpret that? Not just as a snake. No, not just biologically. Within this theory, Peyton becomes a kind of visual metaphor for upward spiral motion.
Ah, because it starts with pay.
Precisely. The serpent climbing the tree isn't just climbing. It symbolizes that active defiance of the AY downward flow. It's an inversion of gravity, of passivity, encoded in the pay sound.
And the Peytova, the leg wrapping. Same logic.
Same logic. It's a cultural object, sure, but look at what it does. It spirally ascends the leg.
Right. It doesn't just hang there. It wraps upward.
It wraps upward, resisting gravity's pull. It embodies that pay motion.
So the user wasn't just picking two random spiral things. The sources argue there's a deep, shared, encoded meaning here.
That's the absolute crux of it. Peyton and Peytova aren't just vaguely similar metaphors. According to the Odom-Tilley analysis presented, they are phonosemantically and symbolically homologous.
Homologous, meaning they share a structure, a root meaning.
Yes. Both start with pay, and therefore both encode that same core semantic concept. Coded ascent, active resistance to downward motion. It's a shared linguistic DNA tied to embodied movement.
Okay, wow. Suddenly, the user's prompt makes perfect sense from that perspective. So, why couldn't the AI see it? Why the rejection?
Well, this goes back to how these AI systems, especially the moderation filters, are built. They're trained primarily on statistical correlations. Huge amounts of data, looking for patterns.
But they don't understand the meaning in the way OT suggests. They can't hear the directionality in the sound.
They just don't have that framework built in. They lack that symbolic cognition, that understanding of phonosemantic roots or directional dynamics.
So what specifically did it fail to do?
According to the source's analysis, a few things. First, it couldn't distinguish the serpent, in this context, as symbolic language representing upward motion.
It just saw serpent and thought danger or forbidden, based on its training data.
Likely, yes. It defaulted to negative associations or potential policy violations linked to the word or image of a snake. Second, it couldn't recognize the spiral motion as representing this coded linguistic directionality, the pay ascent.
Instead, seeing it as...
probably just as a shape. And maybe a shape that, in its vast data set, is sometimes associated with suggestive or other problematic content, triggering the filter.
And obviously, it wouldn't know how to evaluate a non-Western linguistic theory like Odom-Tilley on its own merits.
Absolutely not. It wouldn't have the context or the capability. So the sources conclude this isn't just a small bug. It's framed as a structural failure.
A failure rooted in what they call AI's lack of symbolic literacy.
Exactly. It means the AI is fundamentally misinterpreting language, not just getting a word wrong here or there, but missing a whole foundational layer of meaning tied to embodiment.
That's a big claim, that AI is basically misreading language itself. What are the wider consequences the sources talk about?
They point to some serious epistemological consequences. If your moderation systems are blind to this phonosemantic embodied layer, they're bound to fail.
How so?
Well, like in the case study, they fail to recognize legitimate scholarly or linguistic intent. They might misread cultural symbols, flagging them as harmful when they're not, simply because the system lacks cultural or symbolic context.
And I guess this could end up silencing certain ways of expressing things, certain cultural viewpoints.
That's a major concern raised. It enforces a kind of flattening of epistemological diversity.
How does it do that?
By defaulting to dominant content norms, often based on Western linguistic assumptions where the sound meaning link is treated as arbitrary. Systems trained this way inherently struggle with, or even suppress, communication grounded in these different embodied linguistic structures. The AI inadvertently becomes a tool for erasing meaning.
Instead of illuminating it. That's pretty sobering. Did the sources offer any solutions? Any way to fix this?
They do propose a few potential paths forward. One idea is to build semantic context filters into moderation systems.
Filters that understand context better.
Yeah, layers that could try to interpret cultural, linguistic, or symbolic cues before just hitting the reject button. Another suggestion is an academic escalation protocol.
Meaning?
If a prompt seems scholarly, maybe it's annotated, it gets flagged for review by actual human domain experts instead of being instantly blocked by the algorithm.
Like a human check for complex cases. Makes sense.
And then there's the most ambitious one, actually trying to integrate some of these Odom Tilley concepts, directionality, ecological grounding, movement semantics, into the foundational training of the AI models themselves.
Oh, so like teach the AI that P isn't just a letter, but in certain contexts, it functions like an operator, signifying resistance, upward motion, teach it the grammar of embodied sound.
You got it. Teach the AI to recognize and even process language at that deeper directional embodied level.
So bringing it all together, that rejected DLAE'd image, the serpent and the Paytova, it's more than just a glitch. It's a stark example of AI failing because it can't grasp meaning rooted in shared physical experience like that pay concept. It's not just bad moderation, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what language can be.
And the sources really highlight the value of theories like Odom Tilley here. They offer this powerful alternative view language not as arbitrary code, but as this organic directional matrix linked to our bodies and the world. Understanding that seems crucial if we want AI systems that truly augment human cognition rather than just pattern matching or, worse, censoring things they don't understand.
It really makes you wonder if seemingly unrelated words like serpent and leg wrapping can share this deep encoded meaning based on movement and resistance. What other incredible connections, what other layers of understanding are woven into language that we barely perceive? And crucially, what happens if the AI systems we rely on more and more remain completely blind to them?